Jake's first love vanished shortly after he had their son Ryan. To give Ryan a complete family, he found someone who looked just like her. Me. We've been hitched for 3 years now, and I've always been the woman backing him and Ryan from behind the scenes. Kind, thoughtful, understanding, and most importantly, always emotionally steady. One time when I swung by to pick up Ryan from school, I caught him telling his buddies that I was just a nanny and that his real mom would be back soon. I was over the moon. That would be awesome. If she showed up, I could cash out and dip. Today's Friday, and Jake was supposed to scoop up Ryan from school. It's their weekly bonding time, and Jake usually takes him to this family diner for dinner. It's been their thing for the last 3 years, never missed. But today, Jake called last minute, saying he had to jet on a business trip and asked me to grab Ryan instead. I rushed from the hospital to the kindergarten. The classroom was nearly empty, just a few kids waiting for their parents. Ryan was surrounded by a bunch of kids, all checking out the fancy locket around his neck. Wow, Ryan, your necklace is so cool. Where'd you get it? I want my mom to buy me one too. Ryan held his head high, pride shining in his eyes. My mom designed this just for me. You can't get it anywhere else? That's awesome. Your mom is amazing. She can make teddy bear cookies and design necklaces. I wish she was my mom. I want your mom too. She's so sweet. But my mom is so strict. Except for Fridays and rare exceptions, I'm usually the one picking Ryan up and dropping him off at school. Ryan's more mature than most kids his age, but he's also kinda shy. I worried he might feel left out at school, so I often brought homemade goodies to share with his classmates. Because of that, Ryan's pretty popular at kindergarten. Everyone just assumes I'm his mom, even though he's never called me that. I did make the teddy bear cookies, but I definitely didn't design the necklace. I quietly stepped back from the classroom door. Sure enough, the next moment, Ryan's soft yet clear voice cut through. She's not my mom. She's just the nanny at my house. My mom's a jewelry designer. She's awesome. The kids gasped in admiration, crowding around Ryan with questions about his cool mom. Standing by the back door, I watched Ryan proudly brag about his mom, feeling more than a bit amused. In some ways, he wasn't wrong, though his words were a bit harsh. Ever since I moved in with Jake, taking care of him and Ryan became my only gig. While it's kind of like being a nanny, Jake and I are legally married. I'm not just a nanny, I'm more like a stepmom at best. Ryan's Jake's son with Elise, a talented jewelry designer. But Elise disappeared right after Ryan was born, leaving no legal ties to Jake. As Ryan got older, Jake realized the family felt incomplete. So he started looking for a stepmom for Ryan, someone to make the family whole. With my face resembling Elise's, I stood out among the candidates. From the day I came into their lives, Ryan knew I wasn't his mom, and I never planned to replace her. After all, Jake and I are in a contractual marriage for 3 years. During these 3 years, he's had a stand-in wife. Ryan gets a stepmom, and I walk away with $30 million. I couldn't say no. I desperately needed the money. On the way home, I acted like I hadn't heard anything, keeping up my usual warmth toward Ryan, asking him what he wanted for dinner. I've always been self-aware, taking only what I was owed and not getting involved in things that don't concern me. Ryan, with his usual serious face, listed a few dishes. I noticed him swallowing a bit too obviously and had to hold back a chuckle. Say what you will, but my cooking's pretty impressive. Over the past 3 years, Jake and his son have both noticeably grown. When we got home, Ryan immediately locked himself in his room. I didn't mind and headed straight to the kitchen to cook. Once the 3 dishes and a soup were ready, I went to call him for dinner. Before I could knock, I heard laughter from inside his room. Ryan was on a video call. Since it was on speakerphone, I could clearly hear Jake's voice and another woman's. She was calling Ryan sweetheart, and Ryan was calling her mom. Ryan excitedly told her how all his classmates admired his necklace. At first, I thought it was just another thing Jake had bought to please him, something he'd done before. Even though Elise hadn't been around these past few years, Jake had kept Ryan's connection with her alive, preparing for the day she might come back. It seemed this necklace was genuinely designed by Elise. After 6 years of searching, Jake had finally found her. So his business trip today was really a love journey. How romantic. I had no plans to crash their family reunion and quietly went back to the dining table to scroll through my phone. Only after confirming Ryan had ended the call did I knock on his door to invite him to dinner. After dinner, As I cleaned up, Ryan stayed at the table, looking like he wanted to say something, but couldn't. Ryan was the spitting image of Jake, with the same handsome and dignified features. But his eyes were even more beautiful, probably because they were so clear and pure. They reminded me of someone I once knew, though not quite the same. Leaning on the table, I smiled at him. Is there something you want to tell me? Ryan pressed his lips together, but ended up saying nothing and went back to his room. I didn't mind and didn't feel like prying. My job is just to make sure he's fed, clothed, and taken care of. Anything beyond that isn't my business and not within my control. That night, I wrapped myself in a blanket and sat on the living room couch, bawling my eyes out over a movie. When Jake got back, he found me with a face swollen from crying. He seemed shocked. Feeling embarrassed, I quickly stood up, speaking through my stuffed nose. Why are you back so suddenly? He walked over to me, his gaze calm and soft, his tone gentler than usual. Why aren't you asleep yet? I pointed to the TV, watching a movie. He stared at me for a moment, then sighed softly and reached out as if to pat my head, before I could dodge. His phone rang. The caller ID showed Elise. He stepped out onto the balcony to take the call, and I tactfully retreated to the kitchen. Only after he finished did I come back out. Jake, let's finalize our divorce next week. Elise is back, and our agreement was nearly up anyway. I expected Jake to agree easily after all. I was no longer useful to him as a stand-in, but Jake's expression turned icy. You're in such a rush to get divorced? I'm busy next week. Without another word, he walked off to Ryan's room, leaving me stunned. Our marriage was essentially a contractual employment. He paid me to do a job. Now that the contract was ending and he'd found his beloved, shouldn't we both be eager to part ways? What's with the sudden mood swing? Jake spent the whole weekend working overtime, leaving early and coming back late. I didn't get another chance to bring up the divorce. On Monday morning, he handed me a small box, saying it was something he'd picked up at an auction. I was rushing to drop Ryan off at school, so I just shoved it into my bag without looking. As usual, I brought some homemade cookies to the kindergarten, where the kids gathered around me. Sweetly thanking Aunt May, Ryan stood silently for a moment, then walked past the kids into the classroom. After dropping him off, I asked the driver to take me to the hospital. When I got to the ward, Laura was standing by the window doing light exercises. When she saw me, she smiled. What did you bring today? I held up the thermos. Your favorite, pork congee with egg. We each took a bowl and sat by the bed to eat. I pulled out my phone and opened some photos, handing it to her. This is our house in Nanjing. I've already had it cleaned. After your discharge next week, take Ryan there first and see if anything else is needed. Once I'm done here, I'll join you both. Laura looked at the photos but didn't say anything, just nodded. With the bowl in my hands, I turned to the window. Through the glass, I could see the blue sky and fluffy white clouds drifting lazily in the breeze. Willow branches swayed gently. Jake, we're such a burden to you. I stared at the soft clouds and asked, Laura, do you think Ryan will like the little house? Laura froze for a moment. Then her gaze softened and she smiled. He will. My brother always loved places with lots of wind. I smiled too. That's good to know. Laura said nothing more, just sighed softly. We sat there by the bed, watching the clouds, the trees, and the sun. The bench outside changed from holding a mother and daughter to a couple, and then to an old man. People come and go in life, always in a hurry. Quietly, I said, Laura, let's not talk about being a burden. If it weren't for you and Ryan, there wouldn't be an Alex in this world. We're family. We've been for 10 years. That afternoon, after grocery shopping, I went to pick up Ryan from school. The teacher told me he'd already been picked up in the morning. Apparently, Ryan had left with his mom and dad. Back in the car, I hesitated before deciding to call Jake to confirm. Although it was likely him and Elise who picked Ryan up, I needed to be sure when it came to kids. Just as I was about to dial, I noticed Jake's WeChat profile picture on my feed with a notification dot. I clicked on it. 5 minutes ago, he'd posted a 3x3 photo grid. At the center was a family photo of the three of them, smiling happily on a beach. They were all wearing matching outfits. Ryan looked genuinely happy, smiling brighter than I'd ever seen in 3 years. Even Jake, dressed in unusually vibrant colors, seemed less stern next to Elise, his demeanor soft and relaxed. They looked like a perfect family. Since the post confirmed everything, there was no need to call. With Jake and Ryan away, I enjoyed a brief vacation, spending my days cooking and eating with Laura, then wandering around together. It was peaceful and relaxing. The call from Jake came in the middle of the night. I had already fallen asleep, but the ringing of my phone woke me up. Jake's voice sounded exhausted, with Ryan's crying in the background. Ori, can you come to the children's hospital right now? Jake explained that Ryan hadn't been sleeping well these past few days, and after being exposed to the sea breeze, he had suddenly developed a high fever. Now at the hospital, Ryan was crying inconsolably and refusing to cooperate. I glanced at the pitch-black sky outside and got up to gather my things. Ryan had always been a poor sleeper. When I first came to the Liu household, he'd often wake up in the middle of the night crying, and I'd spend hours singing lullabies to soothe him. Although he's improved over the past 2 years, he's still picky about his sleeping environment. Whenever he had to sleep away from home, he needed his familiar pillow, bed sheets, and pajamas, or he wouldn't rest well. In the past, when Ryan traveled with his grandparents, I'd prepare everything in advance since I was always handling it. Jake wasn't aware of these details. As I neared the hospital room, I could hear Ryan's harsh cries echoing in the hallway. I'd assumed Elise would be there, but when I stepped into the room, it was just Jake and Ryan. Jake's tense expression relaxed when he saw me. "You're here!" Ryan lay on the hospital bed, his small face flushed either from the fever or the crying. I asked Jake to hold Ryan while I quickly replaced the hospital bed sheets and pillowcase and changed Ryan into his pajamas. Then I cradled Ryan in my arms, lying beside him to soothe him to sleep. Gradually, his cries quieted. He nestled against me, his tiny hand clutching my shirt, and mumbled, "Mommy." I brushed his fevered cheek, knowing he was delirious from the fever. "I'm not his mom. I'm just the nanny." After much effort, Ryan finally fell into a peaceful sleep. The nurse was able to administer the injection without issue, and Jake and I sat on the sofa to rest. Jake handed me a glass of water and rubbed his temples. "Sorry for disturbing your rest." I shook my head. "It's fine. This is part of my job. When you take him out in the future, make sure to bring his pillow, pajamas, and sheets. That'll help." Jake stared at me for a moment and then asked, "Did you open the little box I gave you the other day?" "Not yet." "Was it something important?" I retrieved the box from my bag on the other side of the sofa and opened it. Inside was a diamond ring. Jake suddenly placed his hand over mine. "Ori, please don't divorce me." I had no idea what had happened between Jake and Elise that would make him willing to give up the person he'd waited for 6 years and instead propose to me, but I was sure it wasn't because he loved me. Jake is terrifyingly rational, always making calculated decisions after weighing pros and cons. I wasn't interested in uncovering his reasons either. I've never been one to waste energy on irrelevant stuff. I slid my hand out of his grasp and placed the ring back on the coffee table. "Jake, we're just contractual spouses. Now that the agreement has expired, it's time for us to end this." Sitting beside me, he seemed unfazed by my words. Instead, he continued, as if explaining to himself, "Ori, if it's because of Elise, you don't need to worry. It's over between us. This trip was only because she wanted to see Ryan. We won't be in contact again. These past years, having you around has been comforting. Ryan depends on you a lot. Can't we just keep living like this?" I looked at Jake, my expression calm. "No, we can't. I don't know or care about what's going on between you and Elise, but there's no future for us. I only agreed to this arrangement with Jake in the first place to pay for Laura's medical treatment. Now that Laura has recovered, I have my own life to live. We were going to settle down in a place where the wind always blew, and Jake didn't seem to expect such a straightforward rejection. For a brief moment, there was a flicker of hurt in his eyes. "Ori, do you really feel nothing for me?" I chuckled. "Of course I do. Gratitude for being a generous employer." And I meant it. Without the $3 million he provided, both Laura and I would have been dead years ago. That's why I dedicated myself to taking care of him and Ryan these past 3 years, answering every call and fulfilling every need. But that's as far as it goes. I thought I made myself clear. But Jake didn't seem ready to accept it. "You don't have to decide so quickly. I'm not in a rush. It's late. I'll have the driver take you home to rest." "I'll stay here with Ryan." Ryan's prolonged fever had turned into a mild case of pneumonia, requiring a few days' stay in the hospital. Jake moved his work to the hospital room and stayed by Ryan's side the entire time. Elise, however, never showed up. Every day I cooked at home and brought meals to the hospital. One day while feeding Ryan, I got a call from the hospital saying Laura had suffered a sudden brain hemorrhage and was in critical condition. The bowl slipped from my hands, shattering on the floor. The sound startled Ryan, who looked at me with wide eyes. Jake had just entered the room. He quickly came to my side. What happened? My hands were trembling uncontrollably, and my mind was blank. Even breathing felt difficult. How could this happen? I had just seen her yesterday. She was fine. She was supposed to be discharged tomorrow. Everything was supposed to get better. How? Gripping Jake's sleeve, tears streamed down my face as I mustered all my strength to say, "Take me to the People's Hospital." Jake supported me as we left, instructing two nurses to stay with Ryan and calling his parents to come over. Driving as fast as he could, Jake got me to the hospital in record time. The doctor told me Laura had collapsed while walking in the courtyard. The location of the hemorrhage in her brain was severe, and I should prepare for the worst. Thunder rumbled outside as torrential rain poured down, washing away the oppressive heat of the past few days and leaving the air heavy with moisture. After 8 hours of desperate attempts, Laura still didn't make it. The two lights in my life that had once lit up my world both dimmed and eventually went out. I handled all of Laura's arrangements calmly. Jake offered to help, but I didn't let him interfere. On the day of Laura's cremation, the sun blazed brightly in the sky. I stood by the street, holding her urn, occasionally overhearing passersby remarking how the skies had finally cleared after days of gloom. It was a beautiful day. I looked up at the sun, dazed, finding it strange that such blazing warmth couldn't touch me at all. I don't know how long I stood there, my feet feeling stuck to the ground. Everyone around me seemed to have a destination, but I didn't. I once didn't know where I came from, and now I have no idea where to go. Let's go home. I don't know when Jake appeared, but he led me to the car. Back home, I fell into a deep sleep. I dreamt of many things, fragmented and blurry, a haze of what was real and what wasn't. At some point, I sensed someone sitting by my bedside, reaching out to feel my forehead. The room was dark, with only a faint light spilling in from the doorway. He sat against the light, and I instinctively raised my hand to touch his eyes. He caught my hand, his voice steady and devoid of emotion. "Do I remind you of him?" In an instant, I was fully awake. I tried to pull my hand back, but his grip tightened. "Ori, if you're willing, you can think of me as him, whatever Jake could do for you." Victor, that name which had been with me for 10 years. Every time I heard it, my heart filled up all over again. He pulled me from the abyss, only to leave me too soon, like fireworks, briefly lighting up the night sky before fading into darkness. Where do I even begin with Victor? To me, he was a brother, family, and the love of my life. Before I turned 13, I was relatively lucky, though the old orphanage lacked resources and amenities. At least it was safe. After 13, things changed. The orphanage underwent reforms, and conditions improved. There was meat to eat, books to read, but an uneasy feeling always hung over me. No matter where I went, I felt a pair of eyes watching me from the shadows. My freshly washed underwear would go missing. Items in the room would mysteriously disappear. Sometimes at night, I'd feel someone touching my legs as I slept. I didn't dare make a scene because that person was the director of the orphanage. I endured it for 2 years until the day he called me into his office and tried to pull down my pants. I kicked him and ran with all my might, screaming for help as I went. The orphanage was in a secluded area with few passers-by. Those who did pass were told by the director that I was his daughter throwing a tantrum. No one stopped to help. When I felt him catching up, a water bottle suddenly flew past me, striking the director behind me. His cry of pain rang out. I didn't dare look back, terrified that even a second of hesitation would get me caught. That's when I saw the boy who had thrown the bottle, grinning. He shouted at me to run faster and asked if I wanted to go with him. I had no other choice, so I kept screaming for help. He grabbed my hand and pulled me, running full speed onto a departing bus. The moment the director reached the bus door, it pulled away from the stop. The nightmare was left behind. The boy bought me a ticket, leading me to the back of the bus where a girl about my age was sitting. She rubbed her eyes and looked at the boy. Brother, how come you brought back a tail after going to the bathroom? That's how I learned they were siblings. They had run away from home to escape their abusive father. Neither of us knew where the bus was headed, but the boy, still smiling, said, "This bus is taking us to a brighter future." Even before we knew each other, he told me I'd have a bright future someday. That first night in the new city, the three of us squeezed into a rundown hostel, sharing a single cup of instant noodles. The noodles were eaten by me and his sister. He only drank the soup. We lay side by side on the bed, unable to sleep, caught between excitement, confusion, and fear. We had escaped our respective abysses, but didn't know if the road ahead would lead to another one. Out of nowhere, he sat up and asked if we wanted to change our names, saying that today marked the beginning of a brighter future, and our names should reflect that. We picked new names but couldn't settle on a surname. They didn't want their original one, and I had no idea what mine was. Finally, he pointed to a battered copy of the Tang poems lying on the table and declared we'd all take the surname Tang. Our names and our fates tied us together as a family that night. The next day, Victor, his new name, went out and came back announcing he'd rented a place for us. He had saved a little money beforehand and stolen some from his father when they ran away. Though it wasn't much, the place was a tiny one-bedroom in an old neighborhood, but it became our home in the unfamiliar city. Once settled, the three of us started taking odd jobs. We were too young to find proper work, so we handed out flyers, waited tables, and did whatever small tasks we could. Victor, 2 years older than me and Laura, wasn't even of age yet, but he seemed to know how to do everything: cooking, laundry, taking care of us. He was quick-witted and charming, selling products at a supermarket so well that the store auntie often gave him extra groceries. Though life was hard, we could eat, and Victor always said things would get better. In the chaos of life, we clung to each other, shaky but steady. We found comfort in our shared warmth. One day, Victor came home with a piece of meat and said he had good news. A teacher he met at the supermarket was willing to help Laura and me go back to school. We both refused. Laura wasn't interested in studying and had just started an apprenticeship at a beauty salon, which she enjoyed. I, on the other hand, felt too embarrassed, but they took turns persuading me. Laura called me a natural for university, urging me to study hard and repay them later. I knew they didn't want repayment. They just genuinely saw me as family. Sometimes the world feels vast, letting us meet only a few people in a lifetime. Other times, it feels small, where thin threads of coincidence can bind strangers together as family. Eventually, they convinced me. While they worked, I went to school, picking up light part-time jobs like shop sitting so I could study while earning a little money. I quietly saved up, and the first thing I bought was a folding bed for Victor. Since Laura and I shared the bedroom, Victor had been sleeping on the small sofa in the living room. His long legs always dangled awkwardly off the edge. He wouldn't buy himself a bed, but wouldn't think twice about buying my school stuff. When he received the bed, he ruffled my hair and grinned, his eyes curving into crescents. "Well, look at you, buying your big brother a bed. Guess I didn't spoil you for nothing." I looked at him, my heart pounding, both happy and annoyed. I didn't want to call him brother. Late at night, I'd study at the table, while Victor lay on his folding bed doing calculations. He'd always notice when my water cup was empty and refill it, or make me a bowl of noodles with a poached egg if I studied too late. He'd watch me with his ever-present smile and tell me I was destined for great things. Once I asked him why he helped me escape that day. He said he thought I'd been kidnapped because I didn't look like the director's daughter at all. So many people heard my cries for help, but only he reached out a hand. When I started my senior year, the pressure increased, and late-night study sessions became routine. Victor would wait for me outside the school gate every night holding a warm bottle of milk and 2 boiled eggs. Insisting I needed the nutrition, his visits became so frequent that everyone at school knew him. Girls often handed me love letters and gifts for him, asking me to pass them on to my brother. I refused every time, telling them he wasn't interested in dating. One winter evening, a girl handed Victor an apple outside the school gate. He accepted it and even gave her a roasted sweet potato in return. I ignored him all the way home. When he finally grabbed my backpack to stop me, he frowned and asked, "Did someone at school bully you?" "None of your business," I snapped, exasperated. "If it's not my business, then whose is it, Ori? Have you grown bold enough to ignore me now?" He stood in front of me, blocking my way, his face dark. "Don't tell me you're dating someone." I pointed at the apple in his hand, fuming. "You can accept someone's apple, but I can't date?" He froze, then laughed, his eyes soft and bright like scattered starlight. Bending slightly, he looked into my eyes and spoke gently, almost coaxingly. "Is my Ori jealous?" In that moment, I realized my feelings for him were out in the open. I tried to escape, but he pulled me into his arms. Through his shirt, I could feel the vibrations of his laughter. "She said she's your classmate, so I accepted." "Didn't I give her a gift in return?" "I just want you to get along with your friends. If it makes you unhappy, I won't do it again." The cold wind brushed past us, but it couldn't cool the warmth spreading across my cheeks. From that day on, our relationship shifted. It wasn't clear what had changed, but something had. We avoided meeting each other's eyes for too long, pulled our hands away quickly if they touched, and left unspoken things hanging in the air. Until one night, as I was drying my hair, Laura asked me bluntly, "Ori, are you dating my brother?" She didn't wait for an answer. "Otherwise, why do you blush every time you look at him?" I was speechless. Was it that obvious? The day of my final exams coincided with my birthday. Laura was away on a work trip, so she joined the celebration via video call. She teased me about a surprise gift waiting on my bedside table. When I blew out the candles, Victor rested his head on his hand, watching me. "Happy birthday, Ori," he murmured. At that moment, I thought my wish was simple: to spend every birthday with Victor and Laura. We split the cake evenly between us. After my shower, I found Laura's gift, a small box that burned in my hands. Victor was standing in the doorway. We exchanged a glance, both turning red. He closed my door, telling me to get some rest. That summer night, the old fan creaked noisily, its sound amplifying the restless heat. Unable to sleep, I slipped out of my room and into Victor's arms. On the narrow folding bed, we pressed close together. He stiffened for a moment, then wrapped his arms around me. "Can't sleep?" Resting my head against his neck, I nodded even though I was already drowsy. He asked where I wanted to go for university. I told him I'd chosen a local teaching college with waived tuition and fees. It was close to home. He cupped my face. "No, with your grades, you can get into a much better school. Don't worry about money. Focus on studying. I'll take care of the rest." I silenced him with a kiss before he could keep talking. I was so nervous I forgot to breathe and nearly passed out. Victor pulled back, laughing softly. "You don't even know how to breathe properly during a kiss, and you're trying to take the lead?" The darkness hid my flushed face as I stayed silent. After a while, he stroked my hair. "Ori, you're exceptional. You should explore the bigger world out there and meet other amazing people. Don't limit yourself. Don't worry about us. I don't want you to regret not pursuing something important in the future." But I shook my head firmly, hugging his waist. "Nothing is more important than you two. I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying right here." At that, when Laura returned and heard my thoughts about staying in the city for school, she stared at us like we were the dumbest people on earth. "Are you too serious? Ori can just go to school wherever she wants, and we'll all move there. It's not like there's only one city in the world. Love really does make people stupid." Victor and I were too embarrassed to respond. In the end, I applied to a university in the north. Once again, we packed up and headed to a new city. When we left the house we'd lived in for 4 years, none of us felt any nostalgia. Because as long as the three of us were together, anywhere could be home. Life at university wasn't much different. Laura and Victor worked while I attended classes and picked up part-time jobs whenever I had free time. Laura became a well-known makeup artist. Occasionally, she even worked with celebrities. And when she got autographed photos, I'd sell them to classmates for some extra cash. Victor continued his sales career, quickly advancing to team leader thanks to his stellar performance. I earned scholarships every semester. Life was getting easier, and every day felt a little brighter. We made a pact. Once we'd saved enough money, we'd settle in a windy place, plant a whole garden of flowers, and adopt 2 cats. We were all striding confidently toward that bright future. But life, in its cruel way, likes to hit you hardest when you think you finally found your footing. During the second semester of my sophomore year, Victor was diagnosed with a genetic disease. It was an extremely rare condition with no official name. All anyone knew was that it could rapidly deteriorate the body. Treatment was expensive. Laura threw herself into work, taking on as many jobs as she could. While I dropped out of school, no matter how much Victor scolded me, I refused to go back. Humans may not be able to predict the future, but we can sometimes sense its approach. I knew if I didn't stay by his side now, I might never have another chance. Our savings quickly ran dry. I took on more and more jobs, working up to 5 in a single day. All I wanted was to earn enough to keep him with us a little longer. Victor grew thinner by the day, losing not only weight but his sense of taste. He ate less and less. I found a job in a restaurant kitchen, secretly learning how to cook so I could experiment with new dishes, hoping he'd eat just a few more bites. I didn't know what else I could do for him. In his final days, Victor stopped letting me go to work. Instead, he'd just hold my hand, often sitting silently and looking at me. His body was frail, his complexion pale, yet his eyes remained as clear and bright as the first time I met him. On a sunny afternoon, Victor passed away. A life lovingly nurtured for over 20 years was undone by illness in just 6 months. Life is so heartbreakingly fragile. After Victor passed away, Laura and I lived in shared silence. The absence of one person left the home feeling unbearably empty. The kitchen no longer bustled with activity, and the familiar, almost chant-like sound of his nagging was gone. I replayed countless memories in my mind, but no matter the moment, the clearest image was always Victor's smiling face and his bright, unyielding eyes, brimming with infinite hope for life. It was those memories that helped me survive day after day without him. Half a year passed, and Lara and I both began to take small steps out of our grief. Just when I was starting to feel grateful that I still had Lara, she broke down in tears and told me she'd been diagnosed with the same disease as Victor. In that moment, to my surprise, I felt an eerie calm. I thought, if Laura goes, then Ori might as well be gone too. We could reunite in the afterlife and be a family again. After all, I couldn't survive alone. But fate offered me a chance. A month after Laura was hospitalized, Jake found me. He was very straightforward, saying he needed a contractual wife to care for his son, and he'd pay me 30 million yuan for 3 years. It felt like grabbing onto a lifeline. I agreed on the spot. Only then did I realize how desperately I wanted to keep Lara alive. I couldn't bear to watch her wither away like Victor. It would have driven me mad. As long as it meant saving her, I was willing to do anything. After marrying Jake, plenty of people mocked me, subtly or outright, calling me nothing more than a stand-in. That was when I learned how much I resembled Jake's first love. It didn't bother me. In fact, I felt thankful. If I didn't look like her, Jake wouldn't have chosen me. I kept the marriage a secret from Lara, but she eventually found out. She fainted 3 times from crying, begging me to leave her and stop carrying her burden. I held her trembling body, and we cried together. Lara, I've already lost Victor. I can't lose you too. In that moment, we clung to each other, 2 broken souls leaning on one another. In this world, we were the only family we had. 3 years passed. We endured countless sleepless nights and tried every possible treatment, both domestic and international. Finally, Lara's condition stabilized. The doctor said that with regular medication and checkups, she could manage the disease. Just as it felt like dawn was breaking, we were plunged into an even deeper darkness. I had been feverish for 3 days before waking up in the hospital. Jake told me the fever had been so high that medication couldn't bring it down, so he had to rush me to the emergency room. I nodded and thanked him quietly. We'd both tacitly avoided mentioning what happened that night. As I sat on the hospital bed, lost in thought, Ryan arrived. He stood by the door with a miserable expression, looking like he had been wronged. "Aunt May, are you feeling better now?" he asked, his voice pitiful. I smiled faintly. I'm fine now. I'm sorry. Did I scare you that night?" He shook his head and stood beside me silently. I didn't have the energy to tease him, so I stayed quiet too. After a long pause, Ryan took my hand, tears welling up in his beautiful eyes. "Can you just be there for me? And me alone? You always bring teddy bear cookies for my classmates, and now they all want you to be their mom, but I just want you to be my mom." I looked at him gently. "But I'm going far away, so I can't be your mom anymore. When you miss me, you can ask your dad to bring you to visit me." Ryan pursed his lips stubbornly, his eyes full of tears. But in the end, he only murmured softly, "Okay." After Laura's departure, I no longer wanted to stay in the city. That afternoon, Jake visited me again. He asked if I could stay for another 6 months, saying that Ryan really needed me. I shook my head. There has to be a goodbye, Jake, I said, handing him a list I had prepared long ago. It was a list of Ryan's habits and preferences. Whoever took care of him next could follow it, and there shouldn't be any issues. Then, looking at him steadily, I said, Jake, let's get a divorce. I want to go see Victor. It's been too long since I've seen him. 3 years had passed. After agreeing to be Jake's contractual wife, I had Victor's ashes stored in a temple. For 3 years, I never dared to step inside the temple gates. I was a married woman, and visiting him in such a state would surely have saddened him. When I missed him, I would only stand outside the temple, looking in from afar. But now it was time to bring him home. I wanted to take him and Lara to the place we had dreamed of, a place with wind, flowers, and peace. Jake sighed deeply and silently took out a divorce agreement. After signing it, he apologized. I'm sorry for mistaking you for him that night. Jake looked at me, his voice calm and steady as it had been that night. Do I really look so much like him? I shook my head. When I first saw you, your eyes reminded me of him. But on second glance, the resemblance was gone. Jake, I've never looked for a shadow in you. You're not him, and no one ever will be. Victor was like the moon through the clouds, the stars in the sky. He had the purest eyes and the most passionate love for life. He was, and always would be, one of a kind. The night before I left for Nanjing, Elise called and asked to meet me. It was my first time meeting her in person. She was even more beautiful than her photos, radiating a bold, fiery charm, something I couldn't begin to compare to. Honestly, I didn't understand why people thought we looked alike, I told her. Apparently, she felt the same. Her first words were, "Who's the blind one that said you're my stand-in? I'm not half as gentle or sweet as you." I thought she wanted to discuss Jake, so I explained that ours was a contractual marriage and that we were already divorced. She simply smiled. I know, I just wanted to meet you today. After studying me for a while, she sighed and said, what a pity. In terms of personality, you and Jake would have been a good match. He's as stubborn as I am, and we've clashed so much over the years that we're both exhausted. And I didn't quite understand what she meant, but she suddenly handed me a card. Miss Tan, I came here today mainly to thank you. I'm a selfish person. I've always pursued my own vast oceans and never wanted to be tied down by family or children. I feel guilty about Ryan. I've been a poor excuse for a mother, but you've taken such good care of him these past few years. When I met him, he was so well-behaved and thoughtful. He told me you taught him a lot and treated him very kindly. That made me happy and grateful. This is a small token of appreciation from me. As Ryan's mother, Jake has his share as a father, and this is mine. Please accept it. I received 2 payments for a single job. Feeling a pang of guilt, I bought Ryan a pile of toys before I left. The day I arrived in Nanjing, the sun was bright, the wind gentle, and the air carried the faint scent of blooming flowers. I settled Victor and Lara into their places and began unpacking. The courtyard had been cleaned in advance and was already spotless. All I needed to do was give everything a quick wipe and arrange the items neatly. While sorting through Lara's belongings, an envelope suddenly slipped out. It was in Lara's handwriting. She had planned to give it to me on the day of our departure, and the envelope had a cheerful doodle of a smiley face, instructing me to read it after she boarded her flight. My eyes welled up as I carefully opened the envelope. Dear Ori, when you open this letter, I'll already be on my way to Nanjing, where we'll make our third home together. Fate is truly amazing. Who would have thought the little girl my brother randomly pulled onto a bus would become our inseparable family? 10 years, we've been so close that it feels stronger than any blood bond. I don't really know why I'm writing this letter. I feel like I have so much to say. Yet I don't really know why I'm writing this letter. I feel like I have so much to say, yet I don't know where to begin, but I want you to understand life must always move forward. My brother wouldn't want you to stay trapped in the past. He hoped you would find true happiness. In his final days, he quietly told me that he hoped you'd marry someone who truly loves you. Ori, don't be afraid. Open your heart to embrace a new life. I'll always be behind you, your closest family, and the next time you come, I promise the courtyard will be filled with flowers, waiting to welcome you, forever loving you, just as Victor did. Laura asterisk asterisk. My hands trembled as I held the letter, tears spilling onto the paper. I quickly wiped it dry and carefully folded it back into the envelope, storing it safely away. A month later, the small courtyard was neatly arranged and the flowers had been planted. Two little cats lay peacefully in their cozy beds under the porch, basking in the sun. I reclined on the rocking chair when an unfamiliar call came through. The person on the other end said they had stumbled upon my Facebook posts and asked if I'd be interested in publishing them. My Facebook account had been a place where I documented daily life. Starting back in high school, whenever studying overwhelmed me, I'd post a little something to relax. This habit had stopped when Victor fell ill. After that, I never had the heart to pick it up again. The account had remained dormant ever since. I thought for a moment and agreed. Logging into the long-forgotten account, I began to revisit the posts, reliving the story of how we met and the life we shared. Memories fade over time, but scrolling through my posts brought everything back. I was reminded of how vibrant and lively our lives had been. Victor hadn't always been the kitchen master he became. Like me, he started as a kitchen disaster. Once he nearly set the kitchen on fire, and Laura had to douse him with a bucket of water in the middle of winter. Laura hadn't begun her career in makeup either. She had started with hairdressing. One day her boss let her practice on him, she turned him into a spiky-haired punk, and got fired immediately. And I hadn't been a natural scholar when I first returned to school. I struggled so much that I scored only 16 points on my first math test. I tried hiding the paper in my backpack, but Victor found it and teased me about it for half a year. Post by post, I laughed until tears streamed down my face. How wonderful it had been. Time is long, but our memories were countless and warm. Picking up my pen, I decided to finish our story, from our first meeting to our final goodbye. In the story, we saved enough money, moved to a windy place, and built a life there. Every breeze carried the scent of flowers from our courtyard, spreading it far and wide. Victor's bright future, the one he always spoke of, was one we ultimately reached together. When I finished the final sentence, I pondered over a title for the book, 4 Days. Nothing felt quite right. So, unexpectedly, I came across a phrase that deeply resonated with me. Now I am completely free, with no guilt in my heart, ready to live my life in serenity. I decided to call it The Shared Years. It encapsulated the 10 years we shared together, the spring and autumn of our lives. After sending the manuscript, I closed my laptop. The weather was beautiful again today. I pushed open the window, letting the breeze in. The flowers swayed gently, their stems bowing under the sunlight. Victor and Laura rested in the golden light, leaning against the wooden frame. I smiled. Victor, Laura. The flowers will bloom soon. On the next windy day, we'll meet again. Jake's epilogue. Victor and I, there was probably a bit of resemblance between us, but that similarity wasn't enough to make Ori stay. Or rather, nothing and no one except Victor could make her stay. She had always loved Victor with unwavering clarity and resolve. That love made me jealous. But it also made me admire her. She only mistook me for him twice, both times when she was ill. The first time was 6 months into our marriage. She had taken Ryan out for a walk, and a sudden downpour caught them off guard. She used her jacket to shield Ryan and carried him all the way home. Ryan was fine, but she felt ill, even while sick. Ori was quiet, never crying or complaining, always enduring in silence. But in the middle of the night, I heard her sobbing when she didn't respond to my knocks. And the crying continued. I decided to go in. She was still asleep, caught in a distressing dream, curled up on the bed, softly crying. I tried to wake her, but as soon as she opened her eyes, she threw herself into my arms. She clung to me, crying out, "Victor!" in a voice so heart-wrenching it tore at my chest. It was the first time I'd seen her so emotionally shattered. I had no idea who Victor was, but he must have been someone irreplaceable to her. I could only comfort her, holding her until she cried herself to sleep. At the time, I thought it was just a mistake brought on by her fever. A week later, I found out I was wrong. One afternoon, she had fallen asleep on the couch. As I went to cover her with a blanket, I noticed her phone screen. There was a photo of a man. Half of his face was obscured by her hand, but his brows and eyes looked strikingly similar to mine. I recalled the night she had cried in my arms, calling for Victor. To be honest, I was angry at that moment. No one likes being treated as a stand-in, but then I thought about it. I didn't have the right to be angry. After all, didn't I choose Ori because she resembled Elise? In the end, we were the same, both driven by less than honorable intentions. But fortunately, neither of us had placed unrealistic expectations on the other. I told myself to let it go. Yet, people aren't made of stone. Emotions inevitably take root, and we instinctively gravitate toward those close to us. Daily companionship versus an absent figure, the mind quickly makes its choice. I can't even remember when it started. But at some point, whenever I saw Ori, Elise was no longer in my thoughts. I came to recognize Ori for who she was, entirely different from Elise. Elise's eyes were filled with ambition, while Ori's were filled with life. She was gentle, always carrying a soft smile. Being with her felt peaceful, but I began to worry. The 3-year agreement would eventually end, and when it did, she would leave. After all, her heart belonged to someone else. I privately investigated her relationships and discovered that Victor had passed away. Of course, if Victor were still alive, she would never have agreed to be my contractual wife. The realization brought a strange mix of relief and self-loathing, but all my feelings ultimately distilled into a single resolve to keep her by my side. 6 months ago, I found Elise at an auction abroad. She had changed her name and identity, but she was still the brilliant, ambitious jewelry designer I remembered. Bold, beautiful, and fiery. The very traits that once captivated me no longer stirred my heart. We clinked glasses, spoke politely, and avoided any mention of the past, as if we were mere acquaintances. That night, I purchased a diamond ring at the auction. I was thinking of Ori, but I hesitated to give it to her. Unsure of how to approach the subject, when she finally brought up divorce, I thought, so this day has come after all. Suddenly, I regretted limiting our agreement to 3 years. How could 3 years have passed so quickly? My first instinct was to refuse. Then came avoidance. I didn't want to hear it. Eventually, I offered her the ring, hoping to change her mind. She declined, as I had expected. Still, I wasn't ready to give up. The second time she mistook me for Victor was also the last. She didn't say a word, but when her fingertips brushed over my eyes, I knew she was thinking of him. I must have been out of my mind to let her see me as Victor, but if it meant she might stay, it seemed a price worth paying. Unfortunately, I wasn't Victor, and that meant I could never keep Ori by my side. I hope this rewrite captures the essence of your original story while incorporating the changes you requested. Let me know if you need any further adjustments.